53 pages of allegations. Gone. Wiped from a federal database while Congress was busy doing something else entirely. Not investigating the people named in those pages, not subpoenaing the officials who appear most prominently in the files. No, they were in New York today, taking photographs of the one person who doesn't appear in the files at all. And that single fact tells you everything about what this investigation has become. Let me walk you through what actually happened today, because the headlines are going to miss the real story. The real story is not that Hillary Clinton sat for a deposition. The real story is who didn't and why. For months, the House Oversight Committee has presented itself as the last line of accountability on one of the most significant criminal enterprises in modern American history. A network that preyed on vulnerable young people, operated for decades, and touched some of the most powerful figures in American life. The committee says it wants transparency. It says it wants the truth. Today, we got to see exactly what those words are worth. Here is what unfolded, step by step. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton received a subpoena from the committee. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. She agreed to testify. But she made one request. She wanted it public. She wanted the press in the room. She wanted every American who cared to watch every question asked and hear every answer given. No filters, no spin, full transparency. The committee's response? No, absolutely not. Behind closed doors. That was the first tell. The committee that has spent months publicly demanding transparency from everyone else wanted this particular deposition conducted in secret. File that away. It becomes important later. Clinton sat for the deposition anyway. She did not fight the terms. She showed up in New York, took her seat, and answered every question put to her. According to Ranking Member Garcia, she cooperated fully, completely, and in good faith. She did not invoke the Fifth Amendment. She did not dodge. She did not hedge. She did not ask for breaks to consult attorneys on how to avoid answering. She sat in that chair and she responded to everything they asked. Congressman Bell, a former prosecutor from Missouri, confirmed it. Not a single new piece of information emerged because there was nothing to find. And then something remarkable happened. Republican members of the committee, including Representative Boebert, began taking photographs of Clinton during the closed deposition. Not notes, not legal documents, photographs. They were reportedly sending those images to right-wing media figures in real time, turning a congressional proceeding into a content creation opportunity. Clinton's team flagged the violation immediately. If you're going to break your own rules, Clinton essentially said, then let the press in. Let everyone see what is actually happening in this room. Chairman Comer refused. Again. The deposition continued under the original terms, the ones the majority had written, insisted upon, and then immediately violated. A committee that demanded secrecy could not even follow its own secrecy rules for a full session. Now pause on that for a moment. The committee demanded secrecy. Clinton asked for transparency. The committee got its secrecy, and then the committee broke its own rules to leak selectively to friendly media. If that sequence does not tell you what this investigation is designed to do, I am not sure what will. But here is where the story gets significantly more troubling, because while every camera in New York was pointed at Clinton, the committee has been remarkably, almost surgically uninterested in the people who actually appear in the files. Start with Les Wexner, the billionaire, the man who funded the operation, the man who provided the financial infrastructure that made the entire criminal network possible. Wexner sat for his own deposition. The committee had the opportunity to question him under oath about his decades-long financial relationship with the organizer of the network, and not a single Republican member of the committee showed up. Not one. Zero. They flew to New York to photograph Hillary Clinton. They could not be bothered to drive to Ohio for the man who bankrolled the entire operation. That is not an accident. That is a choice, and choices reveal priorities. Then there's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnik. His story reads like a case study in what happens when the truth arrives in installments. Lutnik has been confronted repeatedly about his connections to this case. He denied them. Then more evidence surfaced. Then he adjusted his story. Then more evidence surfaced again. Then he adjusted it further. According to Democratic members of the committee, Lutnik went on the plane, visited the island, entered into business arrangements with the central figure in this case, and then sat before a reporter and denied it all. When Ranking Member Garcia asked Chairman Comer whether Lutnik could be subpoenaed, the response was not yes, the response was not no, the response was, and I want you to hear this exactly, that it was a possibility. A possibility. Clinton gets a subpoena within weeks. The sitting Commerce Secretary, who has changed his story multiple times, gets a maybe. If that represents equal treatment under congressional oversight, I have a government jet and a fishing rod in South Florida I'd like to sell you. And then there's the question nobody in the majority seems willing to touch. The person who appears in the files more than almost anyone else, aside from the convicted organizer of the network herself. That person is the sitting President of the United States. Democratic members made the demand explicitly today. If this committee is willing to depose a former president who has no documented connection to the case, then it has established the precedent, and that precedent now applies to the current president, who is mentioned extensively throughout the documents. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez framed it as plainly as anyone could. Why has the president refused to rule out a pardon? Why did the Deputy Attorney General spend hours meeting with the convicted organizer of this network? Why was that individual transferred to a lower security facility? Those questions deserve answers, and right now, nobody in the majority is asking them. If you're starting to see the pattern here, stay with me because it gets worse. And if this kind of analysis matters to you, subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up. Earlier this week, reporting revealed that the Department of Justice appears to have withheld more than 50 pages of allegations from a minor. 50 pages! That's not a clerical error. That's not a filing mistake. That's an entire chapter of testimony that someone decided the American public should not see. And those allegations reportedly involved the sitting president. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez laid out the timeline. The FBI interviewed the witness who made those allegations 4 separate times. 4 interviews. You don't conduct 4 separate interviews if the information isn't serious. You don't bring someone back again and again unless what they're telling you requires that level of scrutiny. And yet, FBI Director Patel testified under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee that the Bureau had no credible allegations involving other individuals connected to this case. The documents that were withheld came from the FBI. The interviews were conducted by the FBI. Can both of those things be true? Can the director tell Congress there are no credible allegations while his own agency conducted 4 interviews based on those very allegations? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a question that demands an answer under oath. Now widen the lens, because this is not just about one deposition or one set of missing pages. This is about what kind of investigation this actually is. Congressional investigations are supposed to function like a flashlight pointed at the truth. You follow the evidence. You talk to the people who appear in the documents. You subpoena the witnesses who resist. You hold public hearings so the American people can see the process working. That's oversight. That's what the system is supposed to do. Here is what this committee has actually done. It subpoenaed 8 law enforcement officials. Of those 8, only 1 appeared. 5 former attorneys general were allowed to submit brief written statements saying they had no information. The committee has held 0 public hearings. It has refused to allow media to attend depositions, including today. It has made, according to Clinton's own statement, little effort to call the people who show up most prominently in the files. And when it did call one of them, Wexner, the entire Republican delegation stayed home.
When the people who appear most in the files receive the least scrutiny, and the person who does not appear at all receives the full weight of a congressional subpoena, is that oversight, or is that something else entirely? And it gets worse still. Because while the committee conducts what Congressman Beall, a former prosecutor, described as political theater, the administration has been quietly dismantling the infrastructure designed to combat exactly these kinds of crimes. Clinton's statement revealed that the Trump administration gutted the Trafficking in Persons Office at the State Department, cutting more than 70% of the career civil and foreign service experts dedicated to preventing these crimes. 70%. The annual trafficking report required by law was delayed for months. The people whose job it is to fight these networks were shown the door. Think about what that means for a moment.
On one hand, the administration says it cares about accountability. On the other hand, it fires 70% of the people whose job is to ensure accountability. On one hand, the committee says it wants the truth. On the other hand, 50 pages vanish and nobody in the majority asks where they went. On one hand, the party talks about protecting children. On the other hand, it delays the legally mandated report on the very crimes it claims to be investigating. The rhetoric says one thing, the actions say something very different. And when the rhetoric and the actions diverge that sharply, you stop listening to the rhetoric, you trust the actions. Clinton herself put it in terms that are difficult to argue with. She said, and this is from her opening statement, that she has spent her life advocating for women and girls. She called the committee's approach an abdication of duty and an insult to the American people. She pointed out that of 8 subpoenaed law enforcement officials, only 1 appeared before the committee. 5 former attorneys general were allowed to submit brief written statements saying they had no information. That is not oversight. That is the appearance of oversight, designed to produce the conclusion that was decided before the first question was ever asked. Here is what to watch for next, because the next 72 hours will tell you whether any of this changes. First, the transcript. Democrats have demanded the full, unedited transcript of Clinton's deposition be released within 24 hours. If the majority releases it promptly and unredacted, that would suggest they have nothing to hide from the exchange. If they delay, if they redact, if they release only selected portions while leaking the rest to friendly outlets, that tells its own story. Watch the clock. Second, watch Lutnik. Does the maybe become a subpoena, or does the Commerce Secretary continue to enjoy a standard of scrutiny that would make any criminal defense attorney weep with envy? The committee has established that it will subpoena former presidents. The question is whether it will apply the same standard to a sitting cabinet member who has changed his story under pressure more times than anyone can count. Third, watch Patel. Will anyone in the majority call the FBI director back to reconcile his sworn testimony with the 50 pages his own agency produced? 4 interviews, 50 pages, and the director told Congress they were no credible allegations. One of those things is not true. The math does not work any other way. And fourth, watch the president himself. The committee just established the precedent that current and former presidents can be deposed in this investigation. That precedent now applies to the person who appears in the files more than almost anyone else. Will a single Republican member acknowledge that, or will they pretend the precedent runs in one direction? Because here is the bigger picture, and it is the part that should concern everyone regardless of party. Every democracy depends on the credibility of its institutions. Congressional oversight only works if the people watching believe it is genuine. It only works if the subpoenas go where the evidence leads, not where the politics point. It only works if the investigators are willing to be uncomfortable with what they find. Today, the committee showed the country exactly what it is. It is an investigation that deposes the people with no connection to the case and photographs them for social media content. It skips the depositions of the people who funded the operation. It accepts a maybe when the evidence demands a subpoena. It allows 50 pages of testimony to vanish without so much as a follow-up question from the majority. And it guts the very office responsible for combating the crimes it claims to be investigating. The survivors of this criminal network were promised accountability. They were promised that powerful people would not be allowed to protect powerful people. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez said it plainly. Young people in this country are watching to see if Congress will actually hold the powerful accountable. Today, they got their answer. Today, powerful people protected powerful people, and they did it on camera, while sneaking photographs of the one person in the room who had nothing to hide. The swamp was not drained. It was handed a camera and a congressional seal. So, here's the question. What matters most right now? Option A, release the full Clinton transcript unredacted within 24 hours and subpoena every name that actually appears in the files. Option B, bring Director Patel back under oath to explain how 50 pages of FBI interviews do not constitute credible allegations. Or Option C, depose the sitting president, since the committee just established the precedent that presidents can be deposed in this investigation. Drop your answer in the comments. If this helped you see what the headlines missed, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.